Are you ready to make the most of your oil and gas mineral rights? Welcome to the Mineral Rights Podcast. Get the knowledge and resources you need to manage your minerals and royalties. Here is your host, Matt Sands.
Hello and welcome to the Mineral Rights Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Sands, and I'm joined by my co-host, Justin Williams, and we're here to help you make the most of your minerals and royalties. And we have a special episode on tap today. This is our 300th episode. I have a special announcement that we'll get to here in a bit, but Justin, I can't believe 300 episodes. It's gone by so fast.
It sure has, Matt. Yeah, it's just hard to believe. It almost doesn't seem real, but just consistency. That's been it.
Yeah, consistency is key. And thank you for being my accountability partner. And, I think I couldn't have done it without you as far as, keeping this on track. It definitely, when you came on board, really made a big difference and an improvement in, I think, the quality of the show and the content, and really helped me up my game. So thank you. This is a labor of love for us. So thank you to the listeners. Appreciate you writing in, listening, contributing. That's what makes it all worthwhile when I know that the other end of this recording, that it's helping somebody out. And so we're going to talk about that specifically today. And we have some feedback from listeners, questions, this is going to be our monthly listener Q&A episode for September of 2025. Some really cool questions and a little bit different, and some very specific and detailed questions that will help people out, I think, at the end of the day.
Yeah, Matt, it's an interesting one. And yes, thank you to everybody, all the listeners. Couldn't do it without you. Matt, I'm sure when you started doing this, you knew that people needed the information, but we really didn't realize how many were out there. And we've all kind of experienced these same problems. So it's been a joy to help share it with people and help people out. And Matt, people couldn't even imagine the amount of work you've put into this podcast over the years, from editing to coming up with a show outline. I'm sure it's been a huge part of your life.
Yeah, it's been, it's definitely a time commitment. So I think anybody that's thought about starting a podcast, I think the biggest hurdle after you get over, hearing your voice and that sort of a thing, is to be able to do it consistently, and having to put aside the time each week to do the preparation and the recording and the editing and the show notes. And because it's important for me that people have a resource after listening to the show. I know when I listen to another podcast episode on whatever topic, if they talk about a website or they talk about something that I'm interested in that can help me, it's always nice to have a resource to go to on the website or whatever to find out where I can learn more about that particular product or service. And so that has been my goal throughout this, is to have the website act as sort of an offline resource, online resource. But, in terms of when you're not listening to the podcast, you can go, search for a topic or, look up the links and things that we talk about on the show, so you can go and get more information. And that takes a lot of time and effort. And, largely this has been just, like I said, a labor of love. I have not made any money on this at all. This is the expense of hosting and my time and all of those things. And so one of the things to keep this show free, I've had sponsors on the show in the past, and I'm really excited to announce that Mineralware is coming on as a new sponsor. And so you'll hear more about Mineralware as you listen to the show, but I encourage you to check out their website, learn more if you think it might be able to help you. I find that having tools like mineral management software can help automate some of the more mundane tasks and more important tasks around making sure you're getting paid correctly. And that's really what Mineralware is all about. You assume you're getting paid correctly. And the truth is, and I've seen this time and time again, where maybe with consolidation and mergers across the industry, that asset transfers don't always go smoothly. So a division of interest from one operator doesn't get entered into the second operator's pay deck correctly. And when they don't, when that happens, errors can impact mineral and royalty owners, and you end up getting paid incorrectly. And so a tool like Mineralware can help make sure that you aren't left footing the bill for mistakes that can happen during those mergers and acquisitions, or even just during routine, operations and getting your royalty checks. And it goes through and audits, using the state data compared to your royalty checks, and flags for you when there's an inconsistency that you need to dive deeper into. So definitely check it out. And to see a demo, you can visit their website at mineralware.com. That's mineralware.com. mineralware.com, and again, learn more and see a demo and see if it makes sense for managing your minerals. So yeah, that's a special announcement, exciting announcement. They're going to help, get the word out on the show. And also, I'm excited for people to find out more about their product. So Justin, anything else like recollections or any thoughts as far as the past 300 episodes that come to mind?
Man, I think the only thing is that I'm amazed that we haven't run out of things to talk about. The listeners are a big part of that, but also the industry. The industry is always changing. There's always news. And even in areas where we thought things would never change, things are changing with the introduction of other minerals being produced.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think that was my challenge, I think, at the beginning is, okay, what are we going to talk about this week? Especially as we've gone through and talked about a lot of the basics, right? Leasing or division orders or how to search for missing money or those types of things. Once you get past that, it's like, okay, we've talked about those things already. What's next? And to your point, I've been really kind of surprised at how dynamic the industry is. And if you dig just, underneath the surface, there is a ton to talk about in terms of things that are changing. Case law is a great example. This whole recent decision in Texas about produced water, things like that, you can really spend a lot of time in breaking that down and trying to understand what does that mean for me. And so that's what we try to do, is to help you walk through that process, with our news episodes, talking about the implications of things like the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. And, how is this going to impact my minerals or royalties? Or, things like carbon capture. We had an interesting email from a listener who said, and he provided a link to an article. We'll cover this in our next month's news episode. But in our discussion about that, we talked about how there's benefits to mineral and royalty owners from things like carbon capture, getting tax credits. And, not saying whether or not those tax credits are good or bad, because there's a whole another discussion on the, whether those things are beneficial in the long run. It's probably adding to the national debt and all these things. But from a mineral and royalty owner perspective, it's objectively going to benefit people if it attracts additional development on their minerals. And so that's the perspective we were trying to cover on that. But we'll dive into that in more detail and things like that just come up from people writing in. And so, thank you again for everyone who has submitted a question over the years. And thank you for your patience as we work our way through these. My goal is to answer every listener question, either directly via email or more than likely is to get it in a listener questions episode, which is exactly what we're going to cover today. So Justin, do you want to dive into the first question here?
Let's do it, Matt. The question from Marissa, which is, what is the average lithium royalty rate? And Matt, this has been really a topic that is complicated. And there's been a lot of talk around the news, which was that South Arkansas Minerals Association was having negotiations with the Arkansas Oil and Gas Commission for what fair royalty rates would be. And Matt, that there's a few more layers involved in that, because it's not to say that there aren't other ways that other states are handling this, or that there's not some more news to come. And we spoke, I think, in our last episode, Matt, about more information from Texas is supposed to be coming. But there's just a lot that goes into this, and it's an evolving situation.
Yeah, it's definitely an evolving situation. And so friend of the show, Robert Reynolds, who's the president of the South Arkansas Minerals Association, sent me an email a few months back in response to one of my weekly email newsletters where we were talking about lithium. And what he had mentioned was the technical situation was that prospective lithium producers were applying to the Arkansas Oil and Gas Commission for fair royalty rates and trying to explain, justify what their proposed rates were and why they were fair and why they were needed to be what they were proposing. And so that the commission would approve those rates. And that's what exactly happened. And if you go back, I think, to our July news episodes, we cover that in more detail. But back in, I think, end of May, the Arkansas Oil and Gas Commission set the lithium royalty rate at 2.5%. And according to Robert in his email, he said, quote, "To my knowledge, Arkansas represents a unique situation. In addition to being one of the very few counties in the world with private property ownership of minerals," and I think he meant states in the world, "Arkansas has a law which authorizes its Oil and Gas Commission to establish the royalty for brine minerals produced after January 1st, 1979, which is any mineral after bromine." And basically, so the gist of that is, unlike other states or really any other situation, any other commodity, you negotiate directly with the lessee. So it's a contract negotiation to agree on the royalty rate that you'll receive for the production and sale of any minerals that are sold. And in Arkansas, this is very unique because bromine, lithium, and things like that, the state actually sets the royalty rate. And so that's a unique thing when you're dealing with private property rights, because normally the property owner gets to decide that. And specifically like in Texas, right, just across the border, Cass County, Texas, in East Texas, where they're also doing some exploration for lithium. I've had listeners write in that talk about being offered 3/16 royalty or 1/5 royalty, which is similar to an oil and gas lease. And so if they're willing to negotiate for those types of royalty rates, it seems like the operators think that they can make money at that rate. So it seems like the Arkansas mineral owners got the short end of the stick when it comes to the lithium royalty rate at 2.5%, which is potentially up to like 10% of what other states, mineral owners would get in Texas or Louisiana, perhaps. And so kind of an interesting situation there because, it really depends, Marissa, on what state your minerals are in as to the regulatory regime. Again, Arkansas, it's 2.5%, but if you have minerals in Texas, Louisiana, other places that maybe have some lithium potential, it's up to you to negotiate the best royalty rate. And that goes back to, learning about how to do that, learning to, the terms to negotiate for, getting a good oil and gas attorney to help you review the lease before you sign it. And we talk about all of that in episode 6, which is how to negotiate an oil and gas lease. So, I would recommend listening to that if you're dealing with a lithium lease. I think in many states, the same concepts will apply. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at.
It'll be interesting to see, Matt, as it evolves. This is kind of an interesting take on it because I've not seen a time where, especially in leasing clauses, some of the commissions have spoken out that they are looking at this or considering it. Typically, this is all litigated through courts, there's a norm set. So it makes Arkansas a little bit unique. And in Texas, I'm not sure if what Arkansas was going through made them speak to it, but it'll be interesting to see if there is other precedents set in other states for one reason or another. Matt, the caveat in Texas is exactly who owns the wastewater. So it's a bit different, but another complexity that kind of goes into this. All right, Matt. So our next one here is from Kelly. Kelly says, I was hoping you could guide me in the right direction. My siblings and I are in the process of filing a simple probate in California probate courts. My grandmother's deceased. My mother was an only child and passed away in 2024. There's no will. She had lost the deeds and the paperwork proving that she was the rightful owner. And Kelly's looking to know how much it was worth, Matt. And this is a situation that a lot of people find themselves in. Kelly goes on to say that she found a customer ID number, contacted what I assume would be an operator, and they said the 1099 that they have would be for 1999. And so, that would be a good indication, Matt, that it's not currently producing, at least with that operator, but she's finding out how to get it active again and if it's worth anything.
Yeah, this is a very common question, and my condolences on your loss, Kelly. But the first question, to answer your first question, to determine how much your mineral interests are worth would require an appraisal. The cost of an appraisal, or even just a simple valuation, which is, without the detailed report, basically doing the steps to run economics and understand what the property is worth based on the future royalty income producing potential. So I do those types of evaluations and appraisals, and, happy to give you a quote for that. But in terms of the operator, what you would need to do is, like Justin said, if that well last paid royalties in 1999, then it's probably shut in or plugged and abandoned, if that was the last time that they had paid royalties. But you can at least check and see if there's maybe a title issue. Maybe that's part of what's holding it up. And so you can contact the operator and ask them what information they would need from you in order to put you into pay status. Typically, you'll need to provide a copy of the recorded deed that vests the interest in those minerals to you and the other heirs. So you might need to go through a simple probate. And then, as part of that, your attorney should be able to help you draft a deed to convey the interest to you and your siblings and any of the other heirs. And so the other thing would be to check if you have any missing or unclaimed royalties. And what I mean by that is that royalties were tried, they attempted to pay royalties to your grandmother, but they were returned on deposited checks or whatever. they escheat that over to the state. In other words, the state administers that for future. And so basically they have an unclaimed royalty fund or unclaimed property fund that you have to go and claim your, they'll have a listing in there for if you have a royalty check that would, was never deposited or whatever and got escheated to the state. You can go through the process of claiming that, and you have to provide some documentation to show that you're the rightful owner or the rightful heir. So those would be the two steps I would go through to find out if, like you said, how to get it active again or how to get in pay status if the well is still producing. And then, you can also find out if there's other things out there. So if this sort of maybe scratches the surface, if there was a producing well, but oftentimes there are other properties out there that you need to go and find. And so you would need to search the county records to find legal descriptions for any deeds or leases or any other minerals that your grandmother might have owned. And we talk about how to do that in episode 10, which is how to perform a title search. So yeah, those are sort of the two steps I would recommend. And then if you are looking at selling, definitely go and listen to episode 194, how to calculate mineral rights value, where we talk about how minerals are valued, and it just talks through those different concepts and how we look at that when we do an appraisal or evaluation. Unfortunately, California is in a tough position right now due to the regulations and the fact that the governor and state legislature is trying to phase out oil and gas production. So from the standpoint of if an operator can't get a permit to drill a new well, then that puts a significant damper on the value of your minerals, just because the value of minerals is directly related to the possibility of future royalty income. And if you're basically saying, no, there's never going to be any new wells that are drilled, then the value goes close to zero just because you're not going to see any income from that property. And that's really how it boils down to, from a time value of money standpoint, are you going to get those future payments? What's that worth in today's dollars? And that's the fair market value. So unfortunately, not great news for California. So if you're a California mineral owner and, you want to protect your property rights, I would definitely check out the California chapter of NARO. They have a free associates program where you can sign up to learn more, and there's calls to action to speak out against what's going on there, because it's definitely, in some cases, the argument could be made, I think, that it would be a taking without due compensation. So that's going to be challenged in court probably, and we'll see how that all evolves there. But good luck, Kelly.
Yep, good luck, Kelly. Our next one here, Matt, is from Kevin. Kevin says, I have a question. We have wells in Rusk County, Texas that are operated now by TG Natural Resources. We're expected to be pulled into a Haynesville Shale horizontal drill at some point. He says, hopefully soon. What should we be expecting to receive in the mail when that happens? A pooling agreement? If so, will we receive that prior to the permit being filed? And this is good questions, Matt.
Yeah, that's a great question, Kevin. And of course, Texas has got to be different. And so it's unique amongst most of the states in that there's no general statutory forced pooling. So it's compulsory unitization, in other words. So many Texas mineral owners would say that's a benefit, and you maintain stronger property rights because of that. And so what it means, though, is operators have to find creative solutions. There are provisions to allow operators, if your lease allows it, if your lease has pooling language, it may allow for voluntary pooling, which allows the operator to combine your tract with others if they can get approval from those mineral owners. And so in that case, that pooling agreement that you mentioned would be something you would get before that permit is filed, because they'd have to square away how they're going to propose that well. Is it going to be a pooled well, a pooled unit, part of a production sharing agreement or PSA, or are they going to go and do an allocation well? And so I think they, if they have, just a handful of mineral interest owners and, the lease language that allows for voluntary pooling, then they would probably go the pooling agreement route, and you would expect to see that, and perhaps a notice from the Railroad Commission around, your rights and things like that. But that would be prior to the well permit being filed typically. And so that is something that you would be on the lookout for. If they don't go that route, if they can't get approval from everybody, or if it doesn't look like that's possible, and there are other pooled units nearby, they can get an agreement with other lessees to develop those adjacent leases. So maybe there's an adjacent pooled unit, maybe they're the operator, maybe another operator is the operator, and they might propose a production sharing agreement well. And in that case, again, if you already are part of a pooled unit, you may or may not need to give consent or be able to give consent for those new PSA wells. The production is allocated on a lateral length ratio formula. So in other words, the portion of the lateral length that goes through that pooled unit as compared to the total. So it's not just an acreage-based pooling, and it can affect your royalty calculations. And in the last resort, if they can't do the voluntarily pool the interest or get a PSA, then they will go the route of an allocation well. And an allocation well is a kind of a unique Texas innovation that allows operators to drill horizontal wells across multiple tracts without formal pooling. And you might say, well, how is that even possible? If I didn't consent to it? Well, it's because it is technically allocating the production only on the portion that goes through your tract. And so that can be a plus or minus, just totally depending on the specific situations. And so an allocation well may allow an operator to develop your minerals even when traditional pooling isn't possible. And the Railroad Commission has allowed these and approved them despite legal challenges. And it's kind of been the norm now for these longer horizontal wells in areas where there's, a ton of different mineral interest owners and different tracts that they aren't willing to sign a pooling agreement. It allows the operator to proceed with drilling that well. And the difference between those acreage-based pooling, so in other words, if you were to sign that pooling agreement, your acreage would get pooled together with the other, and you would get your proportional share, based on your royalty rate, based on the amount of acreage you own, the net acreage, as compared to the total acreage that's being pooled. Whereas with an allocation well, it's totally dependent on the section of the wellbore that goes through your tract as compared to the overall length of that productive lateral. So it can be very beneficial if you have a small tract, but proportionally longer section of the wellbore going through your tract. An allocation well is going to be more favorable to you than the pooling option. Conversely, if you have a large tract, but then only a small portion of the wellbore goes through your tract, traditional pooling would have been the better route. So it just very much depends on your specific situation, which is better for you specifically. And if you want to learn more about this very complex and, detailed subject around Texas pooling, Jimmy Wright and I did a webinar earlier this year for the National Association of Royalty Owners. And so check that out. It's definitely something I would recommend. If you have Texas minerals, everybody go and watch this to at least have a basic understanding of this concept. And you can go find that on the NARO website. That's naro-us.org. Go to the members section, log in, and then you'll see a webinars page. And you can go there, and there's a link to the recording. You can go and watch that. If you're not a member, you can use coupon code MRPodcast, altogether one word, for $25 off your first-time introductory membership. So that's normally $75. It goes down to $50 with that coupon code. And then you can, again, just go to the NARO website, click on the membership tab or join, and it'll take you to learn more about that. So go check that out and look to learn more. So anything else to add, Justin, on the pooling?
Just that Texas, like you said, Matt, is pretty unique in how they do this. And it can be kind of an interesting situation to navigate. I know I've always looked for help in these situations because can be so specific to both the state and the situation.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, Matt. So our next one here is from Mark. Mark says, my wife and I own mineral rights in Howard County in Texas. We currently have 2 producing vertical wells. They've always received requests to purchase their mineral rights, but recently the offers have jumped up significantly. He learned how to use the Texas RCC website, which great job on that, Mark. He says there's 4 new horizontal permits issued on the land, and he's excited to see what happens. He was also using an app recommended by an operator to track rigs near him, and the operator has 2 rigs adjacent to him, and that he hopes that means they'll be drilling soon, Matt. And so this is, very exciting for Mark. Great job doing your research, and we've said before, if you see those offers jump for some other reason, or you're starting to get a bunch of offers that you weren't getting, it's a good sign. You might want to look and see what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And he says, needless to say, we are not selling. So yeah, I think that's a good call. I think you are probably looking at some additional royalties here in the near future. So congratulations. You're welcome. He says, thank you for helping us. And so, I'm super glad that the podcast is helpful, and that the video that we did on the Texas Railroad Commission website and how to use that was helpful. and allowed you to find your tract on the map and find those new permits. So that's awesome. So yeah, and if you have minerals in Texas or any other state for that matter that has a significant amount of oil and gas activity, we've recorded videos on how to use your state oil and gas commission website. So just search on the website at mineralrightspodcast.com for your state, and you'll find the link to those with a link to my YouTube channel where you can watch those videos and then follow along to find your property. And if you still are running into issues and need some more step-by-step instruction on, really how to find your legal description first, I have an online course, Mineral Management Basics, where I walk through the different types of interests, the different types of documents you should have for your minerals and how to find them. So it's got checklists in there. I walk through and show you how to do a title search and to find those documents, and then how to go through and search for missing money, and also for the State Oil and Gas Commission website to find your interest and see what wells are producing or that are permitted, to find out what's going on in your neck of the woods. So check that out at mineralrightspodcast.com/courses, and you can learn more. So,
and Matt, are you aware of the app that he's mentioning about tracking rigs, just for folks that might not be?
I'm not sure. It might be that he's getting paid by EnergyLink, and there's an app there that has some additional things for your minerals, and there's a free option and there's a paid option around that. And that's, I know I use that to track my property through EnergyLink. That's an Enverus product, and they have maps and notifications for rigs and things like that as well. So yeah, I would think that's probably what they're talking about, but not totally sure.
Yeah, I'm with you, Matt. I'm not totally sure myself. All right, Matt. So our next one here is from Arthur. Arthur says, perhaps you can help. My dad sold a farm many years ago and split mineral rights. Half went to the buyer. Since then, my dad has died. My brothers and I received some royalties from an oil company out of Canada. They never drilled as far as I know. Since all my brothers have died, I can't find anything that shows my ownership of mineral rights. And Arthur, sorry about the situation you find yourself in and your loss. But yeah, this is a common situation, Matt. And it's good that he's looking at this and hopefully can get things in order.
Yeah. My condolences as well, Arthur. And, really to find out what you own, you need to search the county records to obtain a copy of a deed or a lease that has that legal description on it. And what you would do is just simply search for your dad's name to see what instruments show up. And then you can kind of go through everything and see if you can find the documents pertaining to your mineral rights. And so that would be the way to find out your ownership. If you do indeed have ownership, it sounds like since you were getting royalties from the oil company, perhaps you went through probate and got that in your name, or if not, maybe the operator took an affidavit of heirship or something or just took it as, low enough risk that they just paid you and your brothers. But there's a possibility that you may find that if the minerals are still in your dad's name, that you need to go through and reopen probate and get those titled over to you so that you have marketable title. And then that may be required to get into pay status to get any future royalties. Now, you mentioned that they never drilled, but actually if there were maybe no new wells, but if there were royalties you were getting, then there were some existing wells at some point. And in that situation, I would also go and see if there's any unclaimed royalties out there. And you can learn more in episode 103, where we talk about how to find out if you have unclaimed royalties, and we're at a website you can go to search for your dad's name, your brother's name, to see what's out there. And the other thing is to find the property. Once you get the legal description, is go to the Texas Railroad Commission website. And like we talked about in that last question, if you go to episode 226, which is how to use the Texas Railroad Commission website, with a link to my YouTube channel with a video you can watch. You can check that out and then go find who the operator is for those wells that were producing at one point. And then you can contact the operator to find out what information they need to put you into pay status to receive any future royalties if those wells are still producing. And so that would be another thing to do there as well.
You said it, Matt. Yeah. And the research is really going to lead you to it. One thing leads to another. As I've said many times, you just have to start. Once you start, you kind of learn what you need to know as you go, especially if it's your first time doing it. But one thing leads to another, and it could be a fun hunt.
Yeah. Good luck.
All right. Our next one here, Matt, is from Suzanne. Suzanne says she purchased mineral rights from her father that inherited from his mother. Her estate was in estate and not probated. He filed an heirship title, then sold it to me with a warranty deed. I eventually sold them on a quitclaim deed. My cousin sold his in the same format from an heirship title with no probate. When it was discovered the oil company he sold his to required him to go through court and get her will probated, they said the sale was invalid without probate first, then the heirship. Does this mean that my purchase from my dad was invalid? Does this also mean my sale to the company is also invalid? I'm willing to refund the buyer. Thank you so much. And Matt, as somebody that going through this that doesn't know anything, this can be very, very concerning. Legal terms can be kind of scary. And this is a situation that people can find themselves in quite a bit. Definitely doesn't mean that she can't sell the property, but that the title needs to be shored up and be a marketable title where there's kind of a weird gray area, Matt, where there are times that operators will pay you, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you have legally clad and marketable title.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that's, sounds like maybe what's happened. And I guess, Suzanne, without looking at the specifics and the deeds and everything, it would be hard to say. And the state that it's in and the statutes there, some states will perfect title after a certain period of time, even though you went through that heirship process, and it has to be like a pretty long period of time. Typically, sometimes it's not. It would never perfect title. It just kind of depends on the specifics of what happened in your case and whether you have marketable title, like Justin said. If they find out down the road, it could be that it was that buyer went to go and sell it and they found that they couldn't because there was a title defect and they had to go and clear that defect with your cousin in order to have marketable title to then sell it. And so it could be that the buyer for your interest hasn't crossed that bridge yet, and they're going to need to go through that same process. And it may depend also as to what the language was in the deed that you signed as to what you're on the hook for. Or did you warranty the title? In that case, you need to go through and do what your cousin did and go through probate and get the well probated and get the interest transferred over, I guess, since you said that his mother died intestate with no will. So yeah, it really just depends. It sounds like your situation may be slightly different than your cousin's, but without knowing the specifics, it'd be hard to say. And I guess either way, I would strongly recommend getting help from an attorney that's licensed in the state where those interests are located if you need to go down that road. At this point, though, I would say, you've already sold the interest. It may be that the buyer is going to have to go through and do a determination of heirship proceeding or something, which they can do and pay for without getting you involved because they're an interested party in that because they purchased the interest from you. So if you didn't warranty the title and, they're going to be on the hook for going and get that done if they want to get marketable title, and that's something that you may not need to get involved. But again, it just totally depends on the specific facts to your situation. And absent any additional information, it really couldn't give you specific advice. And I'm not qualified to give legal advice either. So definitely, if you're still concerned about it, get with your attorney. But otherwise, you could wait and see what happens. And if they come back to you and see and ask you to go through probate, and then in which case, you can get the attorney involved and go down that road. So yeah, good luck.
Yep, absolutely, Suzanne. And it's a business deal. Depending on the size of the interest, it may make sense for the buyer to go through that process and do the legal work and pay an attorney. But it may also be something where they're looking to you to do that because it doesn't make sense. It's all part of the negotiation of selling a property.
Yeah, absolutely. That wraps up this month's listener questions episode, our special 300th episode. Again, super excited to have Mineralware on as a sponsor. Definitely check out their products and, see if it is a good fit for you. Thanks to them for helping to keep this show free for you, the listener. And I look forward to future partnerships and future discounts that I can offer you through those partnerships. And so I'm still working on a couple additional other potential partnerships coming up and, looking forward to, the next 300 episodes here, Justin.
You said it, Matt, the next 300. Here we go. And, thank you, Matt, for all that you've done for not just the podcast, but the mineral rights community as a whole. There's a big hole of information and you've really dedicated yourself, as long as I've known you, to doing this in different capacities, whether that's the National Association of Royalty Owners, the Mineral Rights Podcast, and other ways.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you. And we'll talk to you in the next episode. Thanks.
Thanks.